I've been starting to think a lot about Chris Paul, and I think I'd feel the same way that he feels. And that is, it's one of those things where don't tell me something that I already know. Don't tell me I played poorly. I know I played poorly, and so I'm a kind of guy that doesn't need to hear it. And what I mean by that is, I think if Chris Paul looked at the situation as soon as he got traded to the Warriors, he probably said, oh boy, they want me to come off the bench.
Yeah, they're gonna want me to come up.
Exactly,
yeah.
And he thought, I don't want to come off the bench, so we're gonna have to deal with this. But I've been around long enough to know I'm probably going to be coming off the bench. But Chris Paul,
I might even have to be cool with it, and will be cool with it, even though I don't like it.
Exactly.
Like you may know that within a day,
right? But let me tell you, there's only one guy who's going to tell Chris Paul that, and that's Steve Kerr.
Right.
So if I were, if I were Chris Paul, to me, I could feel how he feels insulted right now. And the reason I feel like that, not for the Warriors, from more the fans, is that I think deep down he knows he's coming off the bench. But the fact that the media is like, oh, you got to come off the bench, just kind of rubs him the wrong way. And I don't think there's any statement that bothers him or would bother me more than, oh, Chris Paul, he's going to run the second unit. Oh, my God. If I'm Chris Paul, that infuriates me. And you might be like, well, why, Steiny? It's because, again, he probably knows he's going to be playing a fair amount with the second unit. And he'll hear it from Steve Kerr, and he'll talk to Steve Kerr about it, and then he'll agree to it. But, don't tell Chris Paul he's going to run the second unit until Chris Paul comes out and says, I'm good with coming off the bench.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
And you're not saying that it's an unfair question to ask.
No, absolutely not.
It has to be asked, and of course was asked, and he didn't like it. It pretty clearly annoyed him. I think it was Anthony Slater that asked him in Vegas when they had him available at the Summer League. But I no disagreement for me on that one. I can definitely see where he would process it on his own terms and ultimately be okay with it, but also not want to have to be acknowledged July 8th or whatever the hell it was.
Right. Well, there's also another thing that sometimes happens with players who go from starting to the bench is they're good with it for a while, and then you're 10-12, and Chris Paul's struggling, and he goes, yeah, I'm just not used to coming off the bench.
Well,
it's just been really hard. I'm not the same player I was when I come off the bench.
Well, and
then what do you do?
And again, I think a lot of Warrior fans would be like, well, who cares?
Well, they better care.
But what I'm getting at is, for Chris Paul, it is a little. He's never come off the bench in his career.
Correct. That's why it's an issue.
He's a future Hall of Famer. He's an all-time great player, regardless of whether you like him, don't like him, antics, rivalry between the Warriors and him with several different teams, all of those things true. But for him, the player that he's been, if it takes him a little time to get cool with that, then so be it. If he views it as, well, wait a minute, I could start and I could play with Steph, I could play with Clay, and they could bring Looney, and whatever. Again, I get it. A lot of Warrior fans are like, well, who are you? You're the guy that never won it, that we punked over and over and over.
Right.
But there needs to be a modicum of respect afforded to Chris Paul. I'm not saying he has to start by any means,
right,
but to come to grips with the fact that he won't be starting on his own terms in his own way.
Exactly.
That's fair for a guy of his ilk.
And I also think it's fair. And if
Klay Thompson gets that benefit of the doubt, Chris Paul gets that benefit of the doubt equally.
Exactly. And
not that they've had that conversation with Klay, but they haven't even thought about having that conversation with Klay because they know how he would react to it.
All I'm saying is I'm looking at this Golden State Warrior team right now, and I'm saying, championship, it's they're going for another championship. I'll say right now, I'll look at this roster and say, they've got no chance of winning a title unless Chris Paul is pretty good for him. You know what I mean? Like if Chris Paul doesn't play well, then they've gotten worse. But I will allow for the possibility that Paul could be a better fit than Poole to the extent that the team becomes better. So that's all I'm coming with. Now, if Chris Paul comes off the bench and he's not crazy about it, but he's a pro, okay, that's one thing. But you can't say, oh, he'll just come off the, like, you can't disrespect Chris Paul. And I'm kind of talking about the fans too, not that they impact the way a guy plays, but that's, I think, the biggest challenge for Chris Paul to me, JD, is he's now going in a locker room with championship players. But he's kind of a championship player, even though he's never won one.
Sure.
And so there's got to be a mutual respect there, and that's going to take time.
Well, and we got off on a side tangent when we were initially just talking about the trade and the offseason as a whole. I think it's a good time to maybe double back on that conversation a little bit, in the sense that, all of this being said, I do think Chris Paul really does fit as a backup point guard.
So do I.
Like, from a basketball standpoint,
absolutely.
I think he is a really good fit. Doesn't turn the ball over. They, again, can run the second unit, as much as he may hate to say. Like, I think he helps Jonathan Kuminga, which I know is a point that has been made a lot. And so I think you could start to pencil in what that second unit would look like. Probably him and Clay are out there together. I think Kuminga's out there. I think Saric is out there. Like, 4 of the 5, I think you could see immediately, just in your head, as you kind of pencil through, the best combinations of players and how the Warriors have operated in the past. And that could be the kind of unit to where, if it's even just break even, doesn't kill you, as long as the starters are still close to what they've been, you can win a lot of games, or not have some games get away from you in the way that a lot of games got away from you this past year, specifically when the bench players were on the floor, inexperienced. You pepper in a Moses Moody. Maybe Moses Moody's part of that.
Right.
You got Chris Paul out there with Clay, Moody, Kuminga, Saric. You've got a balance of shooting, veteran presence, couple of young players out there together. Moody plays like a vet. There you go. You got action like that. But Chris Paul's controlling all of that.
Maybe we've been burying the lead, because the lead isn't whether Chris Paul starts, it's whether Chris Paul finishes. And in a way, like, I can see him not starting.
That's true.
But how can he not finish? Like, that's going to be, like, let me tell you something.
Yeah, it's interesting.
If he's on the bench at the end of a game, I think that's going to be an issue, because to my way of thinking, he has to be on the floor at the end of games. Like, that's almost why you brought him in.
Well, that's the promise that you would make, right?
Right.
I mean,
absolutely.
Or you might have that might be the promise that Steve Kerr has to make whenever they do sit down and talk about it before training camp, or, day of the first practice, or whatever the heck it is. It's like, hey, you're going to be out there at the end most of the time.
Right. Matt's in Oakland. Hey, Matt, how you doing, man?
What's up, gentlemen?
How you, man?
Okay, it's all good. Question and a comment. Comment first. Every team is just year to year, like every single one, all the time, even the Nuggets. And it's a really interesting mix of people. And I'm not sure I agree with you that Paul has to be out there at the end of the game. Everybody has to be good, and they have to work together, which I guess is a little overstating the obvious. My question is this. Am I missing something? What precludes an NBA team from signing anybody at any time, as long as they're willing to pay the salary cap? But, they had to get rid of Poole. I understand, for the future to get off his salary. But, let's say they didn't ever sign Chris Paul. What precludes them from signing him or anybody for that same amount next year? Is there some kind of slot that they have to go into that you can't use? I'm not clear on that, and I was curious.
Okay, I think this is what you're after.
Cap, right. You're over the cap.
So the Warriors traded Jordan Poole. Let's just, to make it easy, was making 120 over 4 years. Let's just say it was 30, 30, 30, 30. So Chris Paul, I know he's got next year, but let's just assume he's got 1 year left. So you are allowed to trade Chris Paul for Jordan Poole because their salaries match. All the salaries you have to do is match for 1 year. The next year. So you take on Chris Paul.
Or the current year.
Correct. You take on Chris Paul and you move off Jordan Poole. Yes, you don't save any money right away, but you get off Jordan Poole's money. However, as it relates to the Warriors, they're still over the luxury tax. So they can't use that $30 million as though now they're $30 million under the tax and they have flexibility. They have to first get under the tax, then first get under the tax, then get under the cap.
They're so far over the cap that even if they were to let Chris Paul go, they wouldn't be able to sign anybody. Beyond a minimum level player, which you can sign as many minimum level players as you want.
Right. I know. Okay.
That whole kind of thing. Yes,
you said sign.
Yeah, you could sign a minimum level, as many of those as you want.
Right.
But you're paying, if you're in the certain tax level, a $3 million player might be a $20 million player.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
In actual money.
Right. Exactly. And
because of the taxes.
Right. But and this is really the crux of it. The Golden State Warriors won't be able to, if Chris Paul walks at the end of the year, the Warriors don't want Chris Paul. They can't just move off Chris Paul and sign another player.
No.
They're going to have to
trade him for. Now they can trade him for another player.
In theory, trade him for another player, but I think that's unlikely. It's possible, but I think it's unlikely because then we're back to the spot that we were a couple years ago. And now, what if you're really not a championship team? Now you can make that assessment at the end of the year. You can watch this year play.
Well, that's where it's all year to year, and I know the caller made the point about Denver. Denver knows what Denver's doing next year.
Right. And the reason exactly, I kind of wanted to say that too. The Warriors' big three's been together for over a decade. Well, the point is that if they re-sign
Sacramento knows what Sacramento's doing next year, even though they're not a contender, a title contender.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like you either know what you're doing or you don't.
The bottom line is this: at the end of next year, depending on what happens, the Warriors could move off of Clay and or Draymond. That's what we mean by year to year.